Imagine going on a dream vacation with your kids, finally taking a break from work, excited to relax and make memories, only to be falsely arrested just because of the way you look. That's exactly what happened to James Palmer, a highly respected FBI agent, when two police officers assumed the worst. They didn't ask questions. They didn't care about the truth. All they saw was a black man with a fair-skinned daughter, and they jumped to conclusions. But what they didn't know was that they were about to make the biggest mistake of their careers. This story isn't just about one man's fight for justice. It's about racial profiling, abuse of power, and the harsh reality of prejudice. But in the end, karma always finds a way to set things right. Stay with me until the end, because you won't believe how this story unfolds. James Palmer had spent years serving his country as a dedicated FBI agent, putting his life on the line to protect others. But today was different. Today was about family. After months of planning, he was finally taking a well-earned vacation with his two daughters, 16-year-old Lily and 11-year-old Maya. They had chosen the beautiful Blue Ridge Resort in Virginia, a luxurious getaway surrounded by rolling hills and crystal-clear pools. It was the perfect place to unwind, and James couldn't wait to spend quality time with his girls. As they walked through the grand resort lobby, excitement filled the air. Lily, always eager to jump into the water, talked about how she couldn't wait to swim, while Maya giggled at the thought of splashing around. James, dressed casually in his swimming trunks, smiled as he watched them. Nothing mattered more to him than these moments, just being a father, away from the stress of his job. But even in a place meant for relaxation, James couldn't help but notice the occasional glances from other guests. He had gotten used to it over the years. Lily, with her fair complexion, took after her mother, while Maya, with her brown skin and curly hair, was unmistakably his daughter. The contrast often made people do a double take, but James had long stopped caring. His family was his family. No amount of stares would change that. As they reached the poolside, the warmth of the sun, the sound of laughter, and the sparkle of the water made everything feel perfect. Lily and Maya raced toward the pool, diving in with joyful splashes, their laughter filling the air. James settled into a lounge chair, taking a deep breath, feeling truly at peace for the first time in a long while. But that peace wouldn't last long, because in just a few moments, everything was about to change. Just as James was beginning to relax, his peace was shattered. Two uniformed police officers, Officer Bradley and Officer Grant, strode toward him, their faces stern and unreadable. James sat up, immediately sensing something was off. He wasn't a stranger to tense situations. His years in the FBI had taught him how to read people. But this wasn't a crime scene. This was a vacation. "Excuse me, sir," Officer Bradley said, his tone dripping with suspicion. "We received a complaint about a minor in your company, one who doesn't seem to be related to you." James's jaw tightened as he followed the officer's gaze toward Lily, who was happily swimming with Maya, unaware of the situation unfolding. He knew exactly what this was about. He had seen the way people glanced at him and Lily before, but this was different. This was an accusation. "She's my daughter," James said, keeping his voice steady. "Both of them are." Officer Grant narrowed his eyes, unconvinced. "Your daughter?" he scoffed. "A white girl?" James felt his stomach churn, but he refused to let his anger show. He had dealt with ignorance before, but these men weren't asking. They had already made up their minds. "We're going to need you to come with us," Officer Bradley said, stepping forward. "For what?" James asked, his voice firm. "I haven't done anything wrong." Bradley's expression darkened. "We'll determine that." Without another word, the officers grabbed James's arm. "Hey," James started, but before he could protest further, The cold metal of handcuffs snapped around his wrists. His heart pounded as his daughter's laughter was replaced with panicked screams. "Dad!" Lily cried, rushing out of the pool, her wet hair clinging to her face. "What's going on?" Maya stood frozen, her wide eyes brimming with fear. James struggled against the officer's grip, his FBI training screaming at him to stay calm, to de-escalate. But nothing could prepare him for the helplessness of being dragged away in front of his daughters, treated like a criminal, because, to these officers, that's all they saw him as. Lily's heart pounded as she rushed out of the pool, her wet feet slapping against the pavement. "Stop! You're making a mistake," she screamed, her voice breaking with panic. "He's my dad." Maya, usually quiet and shy, stood beside her sister, her small hands clenched into fists. "You can't just take him," she cried, her voice trembling but firm. "He's our dad." But the officers didn't even flinch. Bradley rolled his eyes, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Nice try, kid. We've seen this before." Grant chuckled from the driver's seat of the police car. "You really expect us to believe that?" James clenched his jaw, his muscles tense. He had seen men like this before, men who didn't care about the truth, who saw only what they wanted to see. "Listen to them," he urged, his voice steady despite the anger burning inside him. "They're telling the truth." Bradley shook his head. "We'll sort this out at the station." Lily's eyes filled with tears as she watched them tighten their grip on her father. "Please," she begged, "just check his ID. Call someone. Do something." But they weren't listening. They had already decided who James was, and nothing his daughter said would change that. Maya let out a small sob, her little hands gripping Lily's arm as the officers dragged their father toward the police car. The look in his eyes was calm, but filled with an unspoken promise. "Stay strong. I will fix this." But how could they stay strong when their father, the man who had always protected them, was being taken away right before their eyes? Just as the situation seemed hopeless, a sharp voice cut through the tense air. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" Everyone turned to see a middle-aged woman marching toward them, her expression fierce. Mrs. Jenkins, the resort's longtime manager, had been watching the entire ordeal from the lobby, and she was not happy. "I've worked here for over a decade," she said, folding her arms, "and I know exactly who this man is. James Palmer, staying in Suite 207 with his two daughters, Lily and Maya Palmer." She turned to the officers, her piercing gaze unwavering. "So, officers, why are you arresting one of our guests?" Bradley shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you." "Oh, it concerns me plenty," she shot back. "I don't tolerate nonsense like this in my hotel." Grant muttered under his breath, clearly growing uneasy, but Bradley still held on to his arrogance. "Look, we're just doing our job. We received a complaint. And did you bother to check the facts before putting a man in handcuffs in front of his children?" Mrs. Jenkins snapped. James, still keeping his composure, seized the moment. "You still have time to fix this," he said evenly. "Before you make the mistake of arresting an innocent man, check my ID." Bradley scoffed. "Oh, come on. You afraid of being wrong?" Mrs. Jenkins challenged, raising an eyebrow. A heavy silence fell over the group. A crowd of onlookers had gathered, murmuring among themselves, and the pressure was mounting. Bradley and Grant exchanged a glance. The confidence they once had was slipping. Finally, with a begrudging sigh, Bradley yanked open the police car door. "Fine," he muttered. "Hand it over." James slowly reached into his pocket, his movements careful. The moment of truth was coming, and these officers were about to realize just how badly they had screwed up. Officer Bradley's hands trembled as he flipped open James's wallet, clearly hoping for something, anything, that would confirm their suspicions. But what he found was far from what he expected. His eyes widened as he stared at the FBI badge staring back at him, the words, "Special Agent James Palmer," clearly visible. For a long, tense moment, neither officer spoke. Bradley's face drained of color as he fumbled through the rest of the wallet, pulling out James's FBI credentials, his family identification, and other official papers. It was all there, proof that James wasn't just any man. He was a federal agent, someone who had spent years serving and protecting the public. Officer Grant, who had been silent until now, leaned forward to see the badge. His expression faltered, and for the first time, the smugness on their faces cracked. The arrogance that had driven their actions moments ago had vanished, replaced by something closer to fear. The reality of the mistake they had just made was crashing down on them. Bradley's hand shook as he removed the handcuffs from James's wrists, muttering apologies under his breath. "Sir, I didn't know. James didn't flinch, his expression calm but unyielding. "You didn't care to know," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the air. "You didn't think to ask. You just assumed." Bradley opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. We're sorry," he stammered, but his voice was filled with a nervous tension, a far cry from the confident tone he'd had moments before. James shook his head, his eyes locked on the officers as they stood there, frozen in disbelief. "You're not sorry because you made a mistake. You're sorry because you got caught." The officers exchanged another look, their earlier arrogance now completely gone, replaced by the realization that their careless assumptions had just cost them far more than they could have imagined. The silence that followed was thick with tension, as James stood tall, silently waiting for them to fully grasp the weight of their actions. James's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "You didn't care to know the truth," he said, his words deliberate and filled with quiet authority. "You only saw the color of my skin and assumed the worst. That's the only reason I'm standing here with handcuffs on. It had nothing to do with who I am, but everything to do with how you decided to see me." The words hung in the air, heavy and accusing, as the crowd that had gathered around them began murmuring in disbelief. The onlookers had watched it all unfold, how the officers had treated James like a criminal without a second thought, and now they were beginning to realize the true extent of the injustice. The murmurs grew louder, the crowd's outrage palpable as people began to voice their disgust. Mrs. Jenkins, arms still crossed, stepped forward, her gaze unwavering as she addressed the officers. "You should be ashamed of yourselves," she said, her voice sharp and stern. "I've been working in this hotel for years, and I've never seen anything like this. You have no respect for the people you're supposed to serve, and it shows." Bradley and Grant, now clearly uncomfortable, looked at each other, their faces flushed with embarrassment. "We're sorry," Bradley muttered, his voice almost a whisper. James shook his head, cutting him off. "Sorry isn't enough," he said firmly, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "Sorry won't fix the damage you've done, and it won't change the fact that you treated me and my daughters like criminals for no reason. You need to face the consequences for your actions." With a calm but determined expression, James added, "I'll be filing a formal complaint. I'll make sure the right people know what happened here today. You won't get away with this." The officers shifted uncomfortably, clearly realizing just how deeply they had screwed up. They glanced around at the growing crowd, the whispers of disapproval growing louder. The reality of their situation had fully set in, and they knew they were not just wrong, they were humiliated. Without another word, they turned and hurried back to their police car, their earlier swagger gone, replaced by shame. The crowd parted as they made their retreat, the officers' once confident strides now a nervous scurry. James stood tall, his daughters beside him, knowing that justice had been served, at least for now. As the officers drove away in shame, Lily and Maya rushed to their father, wrapping their arms around him. Their relief was palpable, though the fear and confusion were still evident in their eyes. Maya, her voice soft and uncertain, looked up at James. "Dad, why did they think you weren't our dad?" she asked. James knelt down to their level, his voice calm but filled with a powerful lesson. "Sometimes, Maya, people judge others based on how they look. They don't take the time to see who someone really is, and that's where the mistake happens. But what matters most is that we stand up for the truth, no matter what." Lily, her voice filled with pride, squeezed his hand. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she said. "You didn't get angry, even when they were wrong." James smiled, brushing a stray tear from Lily's cheek. "It's about showing them what's right, not giving in to anger." As they walked back to their room, James knew this wouldn't end here. He had a responsibility, not just to his daughters, but to the truth. The FBI would make sure those officers faced real consequences for their actions, and this time, justice would truly be served. This story proves that injustice will always be exposed, and karma will always find its way. What happened to James Palmer wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a stark reminder of how prejudice can shape our reality. But the truth came out, and in the end, justice was served. Now, I want to hear from you. What would you have done in this situation? Have you ever witnessed something unfair like this? Drop a comment below, and let's talk about it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. And be sure to turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next video. Justice was served this time, but how many others face injustice without a witness? Let's keep speaking up